Welcome to Lecture 5 in the series of lectures on practical skills for social justice advocates. My name is David Lepofsky. I'm a visiting professor of disability rights at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa. And on today's agenda, what is in the Social Justice Advocates Advocacy Toolkit? I'm assuming now we have a platform to speak from. We've got a constituency organized, and whether you're a president or you're a board member, a chair, whatever you are, whatever role you have, you're involved in leading the advocacy efforts. What are the different advocacy strategies we can turn to? Now, I'm going to give lectures in the future that are specifically designed at lobbying within the government, advocating within the government structure, going to the legislature, and dealing with the media. But this is kind of a precursor to and part of all of that. To begin, I think you probably are thinking of protests as soon as I say this, because that's sort of what most people think most people do. And I got nothing against protests, but I don't do them. I've spoken at them, but I don't do them. Why don't I do them? I like coming up with something new, creative, and different. In fact, it's a theme in all of my social justice advocacy. Just because others do it that way doesn't mean I have to. And indeed, I like to come up with something new, different, and potentially better. For me, the protest is something reporters and government expects. And it's people come together, and maybe large number, maybe small number. It can be all predictable or unpredictable. And then they make speeches, and there are chants, which are often been the same chants that we've used at protests for decades. Hey, hey, ho, ho, X has got to go, and all that stuff. And that's good. And if it works, that's great. But I like looking for other ideas, and here we go. I'm going to give you a menu of options today, pardon me, that you can use together, separately. I view social justice advocacy kind of in drawing on the metaphor of army and armed conflict. Not that I like armed conflict or recommend it for anyone, but in a military conflict, any country will try to use some combination of Air Force, Army, Navy, cyber warfare, espionage, propaganda, electronic warfare. It's all not just one, but some combination of them. And you never know in lots of conflicts what specific thing won it. You certainly don't know when at the time, and you may not know ever, or may spend a lot of time where historians try to figure out. Social justice advocacy is the same. You use a wide range of different kind of strategies, and you'll never know, I typically never know which one worked, and certainly won't know when it happened, that one particular thing was a knockout punch. It's more a matter of each contributing to making products. I also rarely, if ever, foresee the consequences of one of these particular strategies. We will undertake it, we'll focus all our efforts on it, we'll succeed or fail at it, but later I'll go, oh my gosh, look at these other additional benefits that I never imagined would happen that came from it. Core principles. Let me offer you some core principles in sort of thinking through deploying these toolkits. First, it's really important, in my view, to have both short-term and long-range goals. But long-range goal is winning an accessibility law. But the short-term goal may be something very concrete, like let's get a commitment from political parties, or let's get our first meeting with a minister, or let's present an agenda for reform, whatever it may be. But it should be a concrete step that through our collective efforts gets us closer to that objective. Using a silly metaphor, in being that I live in Toronto, the center of the universe, If a family gets in the car in Toronto and wants to drive to Florida for the winter or for a holiday with the little kids, we get in the car, and what's the first thing the kids say as soon as we pull out of the driveway? Are we there yet? Well, you got two possible answers. One is no, it's going to be a couple of days. It's long driving. There's no good radio, and a lot of the view is going to be boring. Or uh, guess what? In an hour and a quarter, we are going to be at Niagara Falls. And that is one of the great wonders of the world. We've never been there before, so it's really exciting. We're going to get there. The kids have a sense now that of the short-term goal that keeps them going. Now, I'm not analogizing between little children and a social justice advocacy community, but I know that for me and for people I work with, it really helps to have a short-term goal that can keep our enthusiasm up, because there's always a risk that the long-term goal seems so far away and so challenging to reach that some people may give up. A second strategy I use is that I believe in huge informality of how you go about this and the organizational structure. I talked in an earlier lecture about my kind of vision of the disability advocacy startup that any social justice group could use. And rather than being in a formal structure where we have formal committees that people are too busy to take on and whatever, I like the idea of simply pulling together, saying, hey, we're working on one activity. Who could help us with this? Who could lead this part of it? Without having to commit to do anything else after that for us. More likely to get people involved. And the reality is, in any social justice advocacy effort, people burn out. People move, people have health issues at some point in their life, or they have family issues or other things that can come along. I just try to get through the immediate period and worry about who's going to be involved a year from now at some other point. It is also a core principle for me that whatever we do, we have to be ready to be, I use the word nimble, but able to change directions really quickly. We may be working on a major strategy, and it may be the focus of all our efforts, but if some news story breaks that has dramatic impact and that could be a real platform for advocacy, we have to be ready to jump on that story, and it may mean putting on hold things that we've been working on. This has happened in the education system when there's a horrible story that breaks of something that's gone wrong for a student with a disability or their family at a particular school. It attracts media attention, and we have the opportunity to jump on that and advocate for reforms in the treatment of students with disabilities. You don't want to miss that opportunity when it comes along. What are the major activities that we undertake using this toolkit in the social justice advocacy? And this is after we found our platform, after we've taken the steps that I've talked about earlier. One is building the constituency. We're always looking for more supporters. And whether they are formal members who join a coalition, or they're just people who plug in and join a Facebook group or get on an email listserv, whatever it may be, getting more people plugged in is one. I've already talked about in the previous, the last lecture, about setting the agenda of asks for our reform agenda, educating our constituency as we've pulled them together, talking with them about different options, about what we're seeking and why we're seeking it, and so on. So you build fluency. And I've seen this done incredibly. As an example, the Access Alliance Trust in New Zealand was fighting for accessibility legislation. The government came through with a weak bill that just proposed creating, in 2023, creating an advisory committee that would say what should be in the access law. Well, the Access Alliance Trust came forward with a short answer demands. No, we want mandatory legislation. It has to set accessibility standards with disability community input, and it has to require effective enforcement. And they had presenters from around the country of all ages, as young as 14. They'd educated their constituency to understand these four asks, and they did a really effective job. So that kind of, and that goes beyond just the sort of why, we need an accessibility law, what's my barrier activities I've talked about in earlier lectures. It goes into the core of our agenda. Engaging natural allies is a critical activity. Finding other social justice advocacy constituencies that might want to echo your views or endorse them, and of course, natural allies within the disability community. An example of that, which we just did a couple of weeks before I'm doing this lecture, recording this lecture in 2026 March, advocating for important issues in saving local democracy and elected school trustees in Ontario. I had the privilege of taking part in a news conference on the 11th of March 2026. You can watch the video of it, that was organized by, of all people, the Ontario Public School Boards Association. They represent the school boards who we often are involved in advocating to, as well the teachers' unions, and representative of the student population. And I had the privilege of speaking from the perspective of parents of students with disabilities. Having those natural allies for an ask, the school boards themselves, the teachers' unions, the student elected representative, parents of kids with disabilities, as a subset of all parents, this creates a very powerful image when they're asking the Ontario government and the Minister of Education to take a particular step. And of course, the other major activity, and the toolkit I'm going to be talking about today, plays a part in all of these steps, but particularly this, is doing the actual process of persuading, advocacy, trying to get the government or whoever you're trying to persuade to take the action you want. Now, let me turn to one of the probably most fundamental strategies that I have used over the years and that I encourage others to. I talked about having long and short-term objectives. I tend to divide time into relatively short periods. It may be 3 months or 4 months. I don't plan all of them. I plan the most immediate one. So I may take a period of time and working with the advocacy group that I'm connected with, and have us set a goal for what we want to achieve in the next 3 or 4 months. It may be there's a provincial election coming up, so our core focus is going to be winning accessibility pledges and publicizing them during the election campaign. It may be trying to get a member of the legislature to introduce and get passed a resolution of the members of the legislature. More about that in a future lecture. There's a range of different things that may be that we're involved in. It may be just saying, let's go and organize community groups in 2 or 3 different communities, but a bite-sized, achievable set of goals, and focus all efforts on them. This serves several benefits. It creates a sense of momentum. It creates a sense of achievability to counteract any kind of frustration people have at the obstacles that your advocacy community may be facing over the long term. It also avoids distraction. You're going to always have people coming along with good ideas of other things we could do. And my reaction is often, hey, that sounds like a great idea. We could look at that later. If you want to work on it on your own, more power to you. But we're focusing on these immediate priorities right now. And the other key part of this activity is celebrate milestones. When you succeed in one of these things, it's really good to plan some kind of event where people get together. You may just meet in a pub and get together and say, let the key organizers, anybody else who wants, and have a chance to just smile and laugh and feel, hey, we got somewhere. Now, one tool I use in probably each of the different segments that I've described here, or pardon me, different kinds of activities, is the AODA Alliance update. We used these before with the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee. The AODA Alliance is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. It's the coalition that I chair that advocates to get our Disabilities Act effectively implemented and enforced. These updates, which I, at the present time, write, go out by email. We don't have them on a fixed schedule. When things happen, and when time permits, they go out. And they also get posted on our website. The website has got a What's New link, aodafeedback.org. You can go to it. It's got a What News link, What's New, and right at the top is whatever our latest update is. But also it's got links, I use WordPress for this, divided by subject matter. So on the homepage, if you go to the elections page, you can see our advocacy for accessible elections. If you go to the education page, you can see our advocacy for barrier-free education. If you go to the healthcare page, you'll see our advocacy in that area, and so on. But each update, everything you see posted there is one of our updates. So what's in an email update? Again, anyone doing this, come up with another way of doing it, come up with a better way of doing it. Here's what we found works. The key ingredients are these. First, a headline. The headline's in the subject line of the email, and it's presented as a headline. And my aim of the headline, it's written like a newspaper headline, but mine tend to be too long, is it should tell you, the reader, everything you need to know about the guts of the story. Government refuses to do X after repeated request, whatever it may be. And the advantage of that is that if some of our readers only read the headlines, they don't have time to read all of our updates, or they only read the rest of the update if they think the subject matter particularly pertains to them. If they're involved in education, they may read our education updates, but not our healthcare updates, or vice versa. I've seen any number of community groups who have regular email updates, but their subject line is always, latest news or something. And my view is the subject line of an email is, in the case of this kind of effort, prime real estate. Don't squander it. Have it say all you need them to see if that's all they're going to read. The next part of the update is the summary. Now, my summaries don't just summarize. They actually may include pages of information. Other people might just put in a one-liner or a one paragraph or something that summarizes what's there. The next heading we always have, and the summary may be just explaining what's happened lately, what we're trying, or our reaction to something. The next heading I usually use is a heading, how you can help. We didn't used to do this. We always, often included action tips, but it actually, having added this more recently, I find that including this really forces me to crystallize, always using these as a platform to engage our supporters in doing more. And the how you can help can list one tip, two tips, multiple tips, but also hyperlinks to what they need to be able to do whatever it is you're suggesting. Sometimes I'll include a heading for more background. So for people who want to learn more about this subject that I'm setting out, it may be what's in prior updates or whatever, just a list of points and hyperlinks. I regularly, at some point in these, ask for feedback. I ask our supporters, if you have any ideas or any feedback on what we're doing, please let us know. And using the email server that we rely on, anyone who wants to reply just hits reply. I do not have one of those listservs where anybody can reply and everybody reads it, because you lose readers through those, in my view. They're fine for a small discussion between a small group, but there's always the risk that if it's a large group of supporters, that someone is going to overload it and then people will just drop off. So mine is only used as a distribution technique. Now, the final part of our email updates is a heading, more details. And under that, I tend to include sometimes more detailed explanation, but most of the time it's a news article or a collection of news articles, or a letter to the government, or a letter from the government, or a brief we've submitted, or a draft brief we're seeking input on, whatever it may be. So this is for someone who's read the summary, read the headline. They actually do want to find out more. The summary might say, we've got latest news from our news conference from last week. Here are 4 articles, and I list them. And then you can jump down to the bottom if you want to read the articles. But if you don't want to read the articles, you don't have to. You get the benefit of knowing that they're there. Who do I send these to? Well, we have a listserv that people who support us, who are our supporters, sign up to. On social media, I blast sometimes the full content, or on Twitter, whatever, or Blue Sky, it'll just be the headline and then a link for reading it. But I also send them to select reporters who want to be kept posted on details, even if I'm not doing a news release. And I regularly send them to members of the legislature at the level of government that I'm dealing with. If it's a provincial issue, to all the members of the provincial legislature. These updates serve several functions. A critical one is they keep our community posted. They know what we're doing. And they know there's someone out there trying, that they can be happy things are going. Sometimes we just get an email or someone approaches us and say, keep it up, great work, we appreciate it, or why aren't you doing more of this, or whatever. And that kind of exchange, whether it's positive or negative, is really good. It means people are engaged. It also documents our history. These are the first draft of our advocacy, of the advocacy history. And in fact, when I've written publications on our history, and when I write more, time permitting, these are actually what I work from. They are the first draft of history. I describe our website, our compilation of these, as our open filing cabinet. You want to do research on a topic, go there, you can find it out. I've had some government officials tell us that they find our website to have been a more useful resources than the internal government files on a particular subject, where it's harder to find out what's going on. Now, let me turn from my general AODA updates as a strategy tool to a particular subset. That's the action kit. Our action kits go out from time to time. They are done as an AODA update, but they are focusing on a particular area of activity, like one of these targeted activities that we set a 3 or 4 month target goal for. So if it's an election campaign or whatever, the first thing we do in it, try to have a catchy headline, referring to, Ontario 2025 election action kit dash getting commitments on X or something. Something that lets somebody who might be interested in this know that it's worth reading on. Next, explain the issue. Explain what the core focus is that you want to address in the action kit, what our aim is in this whole undertaking. Then provide the necessary background. If it's in an election, if we've gotten commitments from the parties and you want to get people to publicize them, summarize what the parties have said with hyperlinks to what the parties, to where you can read their full commitments. Or if we're trying to get commitments, give a summary of what they've done in the past, perhaps, what they promised in the last election. Then you provide, and this is the key part of the kit, provide action tips. What can you do to help? And in the case of disability activity, I will sometimes have a heading for everybody, action tips, and then a subheading just for disability community organizations. Post this on your website, get your staff to do A, B, or C, whatever. I do not recommend, I will in these action kits often recommend writing your MPP, and where we have an updated list, we will post online a list of MPP, members of provincial parliament or federal parliament, so that they can easily get to those. If you just tell them to look it up, they're less likely to do it because it requires more effort on their part. My goal is make it easy. I want to be the fast food of political action, advocacy action, though fast food not in terms of nutritional quality, but in terms of speediness and ease of use. Um, One of the things I may do is say write MPPs or write members of parliament. The one thing I don't recommend, and to you, I don't recommend, is setting up one of those automated systems where you write one letter and it gets sent to every member of the legislature as a separate automated email. Um, there are systems that do that. There are also systems that say, plug in your email address and this will automatically go to every member of the legislature. It looks like it's efficient. It looks like it's building support. Um, it isn't. And the reason is I've talked to politicians and their staffers. When they see these coming, when they get multiple emails from multiple people in identical wording, they know it's automated and they're less likely to take it seriously. They are more likely to take it seriously if it looks like it's an individual's message. Even if it's a copy and paste from your action kit, I strongly recommend that you begin with as much as you can in it. Add your own personal comments. This matters to me because barriers I face include something that personalizes it, that shows it's not just somebody did a click. Because somebody just doing a click doesn't really necessarily mean to a politician it's something that's that the writer is very deeply concerned about. Um, the most powerful, of course, is the handwritten letter, because I guess some people do that, and in snail mail, because to them it means somebody took the time and took the effort to actually write out their personal thoughts. Or personalized letters or phone calls we may come up with. We did a particular campaign like this, saying, reach out and press for a particular goal. This is a good 25 years ago. And I remember one of our supporters who was actually skeptical about it, very skeptical about whether these make any difference. They happened to be standing in a cafeteria lineup right behind the Premier of Ontario, who was a serious holdout on the issue and actually the focus of our advocacy efforts. And so this somewhat reluctant supporter of our cause, a strong supporter, but reluctant about the strategy, thought, heck, I'm going to do it. Tapped the Premier on the shoulder, didn't write, actually did the shtick in person, and then proudly announced afterwards, which we were all ecstatic about, that they got that opportunity. In this action kit, always, like any update, ask for feedback and encourage people to come up with their own strategies. And of course, provide links for more information. Next kind of activity that I want to turn your attention to, apart from the action kit, is planning a creative event. Now, as I said at the outset, the first thing that will come to mind to many is protests. Let me talk to you about different ideas of events. Earlier lecture, I talked about the town hall to start a group going in a particular activity, or gathering input like the What's My Barrier activity. That gives you a chance to crowdsource your campaign. We did a strategy once where we held a political action lab. We invited people to come, and in different groups, they got to talk about how do you approach a politician, or how do you meet with a politician, or how do you talk to journalists. And we had some people from those areas, including some former politicians who were prepared, or opposition politicians, who were prepared to sit and let you role play with them. It was actually quite a lot of fun. And I know the Access Alliance Trust in New Zealand did this more recently, but they did it on Zoom. And did breakout groups so that people could give it a try. We did a strategy in the 1999 Ontario election where we we wrote a one-page leaflet about our issues in the election, and we made it available for download. We got some of our disability community organizations to print up quantities of them. And then we had a volunteer who was getting volunteers to go around and hand out leaflets. Now, we didn't have a lot of people, and we probably gave out a few thousand leaflets for the whole province. But if you target them at the right place, like in Toronto, a busy subway station at rush hour on the way home from work, you can get a lot of people. And I remember somebody at my office coming up to me one day and saying, You guys are everywhere. I got a leaflet when I got on the subway, and when I got home, an hour outside Toronto, I got a leaflet at a shopping mall. I went with my family for dinner, and I figured, A, that was serendipitous in the extreme, and B, you want to look like exactly that. You want that idea that you could be. And when we thought about leaflets, we thought, hey, give it out before someone gets on the subway. They can read it, and if they put it down on the subway, somebody else can pick it up and read it after. You can get more than one reader out of one leaflet. It helps both crowdsource the campaign and getting people a sense that they can work on this wherever they are. Uh, Another idea of a creative strategy I've seen used is the barrier scavenger hunt. Specifically, or I've especially encouraged this for university students. You want to raise issues about accessibility at your university campus? Arrange a scavenger hunt. Invite staff, professors to join you. Go around the university, take pictures, assemble them in a montage, present them to the president of the university or the board of governors. It's kind of a fun activity, and it's a great way to doc. This could be done in schools, could be done in the community. There's also more sort of creative, politically focused events, pardon me, but which are nonpartisan. I want to describe one that one of our supporters came up with when I was very new at this, back in the spring of 1995. It borrows from the ideas in a book I recommended at the start of these lectures, and I'm going to recommend, Saul Alinsky's book, Reveille for Radicals. It's a book written in the 60s about how to organize clever social justice advocacy events. So we were brand new, the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee. We were tiny, and we wanted to try to go into a provincial election and insist that the parties give us commitments to pass a Disabilities Act. Most people in the disability, most people in the public, most people among the candidates didn't know anything about this. So we're sitting around a brainstorming session, oh, there's probably about 10 of us, and someone said, well, why don't we go to an all candidates debate? Well, for one thing, back then the media didn't cover all candidates debate. We didn't have smartphones where you could video or stream them. So politicians could say anything, and who cares? But then one of our members said, why don't we go to an all candidates debate at an inaccessible location? And all of a sudden, the light bulbs went off for all of us. So one of our volunteers, a couple of our volunteers, took on the role of phoning around to find out where the all candidates debates were in Toronto. This is where this was based. If they found ones that were locations accessible, well, we weren't going to go there. And then one of them found one at a schoolhouse that is inaccessible in Toronto, which most people would be surprised at that, but many, if not most of our schools are physically inaccessible to people with wheelchairs. So before we did an event, we had one of our volunteers go to the school and make sure that we were right, that it wasn't accessible. Then we arranged for, I think if we were lucky, we had a dozen people go to this event. Maybe 4 of them were in wheelchairs. The event was amazing, and it unfolded in a way that I could never have predicted. First, there were stairs to go in, and one TV station came and filmed the folks in wheelchairs trying to go in and not able to go in, and everybody else was going up the stairs. We had an all-news radio station at the time. They would not send a reporter, but I called in advance, and I got them to agree that I could call them on my then brand new cell phone, and I reported myself from curbside about what was going on, and they played it to the air live. That's not the end of the story. One of our members of this group, I don't know who, just went on their own upstairs into the all candidates debate and stood up. The audience was there, the candidates were answering questions, and this member of our group stood up and said to the candidates, how dare you? Why are you up here? There are people with disabilities down there. You should go and talk to them. Now, I didn't have a clue that this was happening. But then the politicians came down to talk to us. So they're standing out in front of us. in front of the schoolhouse on the steps talking to this cohort of people, including people with disabilities. The TV cameras capturing all of this, including when one of our members said, "You can't go back in there. You gotta talk to us." I whipped out my phone and called the news station and said, "The story continues. The politicians came out," and they ran this to air. This is not the end of the story. This is going on, and the politicians said, "Look, we've got to go back in. There are people waiting." Meanwhile, while we're out there, and before they go back in, the doors to the schoolhouse open, and out comes some people and more people and more people from upstairs. They were bored waiting, so they came down. The organizers of the All Candidates debate run inside, bring out chairs. And then, for the rest of the evening, they held the event outside the schoolhouse on the sidewalk. TV cameras still rolling. I whip out my phone again, call the radio station that's all news. More breaking news. And they put this on the air. We got TV, we got radio, we got newspapers from something 12 people pulled off, which most of it was completely unplanned, but it worked. So I strongly encourage brainstorming to come up with these kind of clever events. Let me now turn to another kind of more typical or traditional strategy. Once you know your agenda for reform, once you've got your group together, it's worth sending a letter to government setting out your demands. We are calling on the government to do X, either pass certain legislation or to improve a certain thing, but whatever. Now, this letter has multiple functions and should be written for multiple audiences. It should be written in plain language so that it will be understood by anyone, not just specialists in the field or lawyers or whoever. Its aim is, of course, to explain what we're asking for, why it's good for everybody, a theme I've emphasized, heading off expected counter-arguments before they even happen, offer to help work together. This letter should be aimed at being read by a politician, if it's going to a cabinet minister, to their staff, and public servants. So it should speak to all of them, whether they know nothing about the subject or they know lots about the subject. It should also be persuasive to our supporters. So you put it out in an email update like the ones I've described so that they can read it, and it should be written where they would say, "Yeah, I agree." When they're reading it, they should be thinking, "I'm happy these folks are doing this. I want to be part of this. And even if I can't do any action, I just want to feel a sense of comfort that I support it." So it should educate our supporters. It also should be the kind of thing which, if it's spread to other people, they would want to become supporters. And finally, it should be very useful. It should speak to journalists. You may not send it to any journalists at this time, but you may send it to them later, and you want to show what it is specifically you are asking for. You might want to send it to all of the members of the legislature. If you're sending it to one minister, let all the other ones know you're asking, because that will inform them what's going on. If they're opposition, they can see this is something that they might want to consider getting on their agenda. If they're government, there may be other members of the government who see it, MPPs or members of parliament, who are sympathetic to your view, who might, unbeknownst to you, put their word in support of what you're asking for. Through an action kit or an email update, an AODA Alliance update, when I said these, I may well under what you can do to help or how you can help heading, I may encourage people to write the minister or their own member of legislature and support the letter. Again, it should be written in a way that's persuasive to your own supporters so that they'll want to do that. They can cut and paste it in and say, this letter just got sent and I agree with it. One of the huge benefits of one of these letters is that it starts the formal campaign going. Later in time, if you're talking to a journalist or an opposition member or a member of the legislature from the same party, you can say, look, we've been asking for this since so-and-so time, since we wrote this. Here's the letter. We asked for this 5 years ago. It also can be the source or the start of a social media campaign. This is something I've done, where you start a clock ticking. You ask for a certain thing, and then you start a count up on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, saying it's been 322 days since we wrote the government for X. They still haven't answered, and that gives a sense of immediacy or increasing urgency. Let me now turn to election strategy. I mentioned earlier that you might set aside a chunk of time for like 3 months or whatever, to focus on an election strategy. What's the goal? The goal is not partisan. I've said earlier from the outset of this series of lectures, the activity I'm involved in is nonpartisan, and that's what I believe is the most effective way to be. It is not to elect or defeat any party or candidate. The goal is to create essentially a parallel election campaign during the election campaign. A parallel campaign aimed at using the focus on the election as a platform to get election commitments from the parties. The preferred outcome would be if all the parties make all the commitments you want, but at least the aim is to get the most from them that you can get. How do you do this? First step comes long before. If you know an election is coming because it's a fixed date scheduled one, or there's a rumor of an election potentially coming, there's the first step. First step is to come up with a list of what you internally within your advocacy community, of what you want to campaign for, what you want to ask of the politicians. I am notorious for asking, in some earlier elections, for a longer list of things. I've been under a lot of pressure to ask for a much shorter list because it's easier to get things if it's a short list. If it's a long list, you'll hear from opposition parties, well, wait till we're in power and then we can figure this out. And I've struggled to come towards a shorter list, or framing the demand in a single ask, but that actually is captured in a document. We in the 2025 Ontario election asked the parties to make the Accessible Ontario Pledge, and then we came up with a document that listed what that pledge would be. And they may commit to some, all, or none of it, but it's at least mapped out there. First, you got to brainstorm what you want to ask for, and that's using very much the same principles I talked about in the last lecture, in talking about high yield impact, doable, but you want to think about it in the context of what you think you can get a commitment to in a specific election campaign setting. My goal is to get an election commitment from each party in the form of a letter to us. Now, parties issue formal platforms, many do, during the campaign. I don't aim for getting in there. Rather, I aim for a side letter to us that we can make public that sets out what their commitments are if elected. Why? In a campaign document, we would at most get a line or two, and it's going to be far less specific than we need. And so I'm quite content to have it be in a letter to us. And I can tell you that the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee from 95 to 2003, and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance from 2005 to the present, has gotten election commitments in Ontario from at least either all or all save one of the Ontario parties. And my view is, if it's in a letter, it's in a letter platform to us, and I treat it as part of the platform. Then, once you know what it is you want to ask for, write the parties. Write a letter to all the party leaders well before the election, and spell out, there's election coming, we aren't supporting or opposing any party, we ask that your party make the following commitments, we'd be happy to work with your staff on these. It's important to get it out way early. Don't wait for the election campaign to formally begin. For those watching from outside Canada, our official campaigns are not like the US 3, 4 year long ones. They're called formally at a particular date, and there's usually 4 or 5 weeks to the campaign, and that's it. If you wait till the campaign begins, then you're really going to be in a position of disadvantage, and you're in a position of disadvantage because the party at that stage usually sets up a committee to deal with the flood of questionnaires they're going to get from all sorts of community groups. I want my list of demands to be sent to the party well before that's in place, and to go to the policies um, or the party's policy senior people. Once it's going to one of those election campaign committees, they are usually just working within the confines of a platform that's already been established. They may go beyond it, but it's much harder to get them to. If you send this to them 5 months before, you've got a capacity to contact the party, ask to speak to their relevant policy people, and I've actually offered to give them a briefing on what we're asking for and answer their questions. But in any event, that it's important to get this out early, and then ultimately aim for them to send a letter back. Now, when they send those letters back, if I look at them and I'm not super, I think that they fall short. It's not beyond me to consider contacting their policy people and saying, are you sure you don't want to add X? Because often in a rush, they may be deficient. And I'm not shy about asking. That doesn't mean they're going to review it. But if they do, and if they replace it with something, I just use the final version. Now, then after we're past that process, which goes way before, then during the campaign or shortly before, a core effort that we need to undertake is to give our supporters the tools to engage in election advocacy, to seek these kind of commitments. And the solution for that is the Election Action Kit, using all the principles I gave or ideas I gave earlier in this lecture. But what do we provide? If we already know what the parties any of the parties have committed, we put it in there. We then provide the contact information. You need a volunteer to try to pull down the names and email addresses, phone numbers, whatever, of the candidates in each riding. We encourage our members to actually press candidates to make these commitments. You summarize what the commitments are in terms of people can grab quickly. And we've had people doing this at all candidates debates. We've had people do this when a candidate or their supporter knocks on their door. We've had them go to candidates' events. The beauty of this is it's crowdsourced, and it's something people can do wherever they are. One of the strategies we recommend is if you're going to ask a question at all candidates debate, have somebody video it for you, because you can then take that video and post it on social media, and then the answer they're giving becomes publicly available. We've done, and this is a strategy you can do during a campaign, is use social media to blitz the candidates. We've actually formulated a couple of questions like, will you commit to X or Y? And then sent them by tweet. I don't call it X, I call it Twitter. To each candidate for whom we've got a Twitter handle. Had a volunteer pull together all these handles, had a volunteer literally send these to each of them. And you get some answers, and in some cases you don't. In fact, one of the strategies we used, this was actually a lot of fun, 2015 federal election, and the parties were asked by some disability groups to commit to pass a national accessibility law, which, by the way, we now have, the Accessible Canada Act, though it is way weaker than it should be. And so a couple of the parties said yes, one didn't answer, and the party we weren't yet sure about as the election unfolded was the federal Liberal Party. So we're tweeting to them, and what we said is, if your party doesn't go on record, will you commit to it personally, and will you commit to try to get your party on side? Well, we got a couple of candidates for federal office from the Liberal Party to say yes on Twitter. So we thanked them, and then we tweeted to other liberals, these two liberals support this, do you? And more gathered, and more did. I remember one who had said yes tweeted that he was going to a Toronto Blue Jays game with the Liberal leader who was soon to become Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. So I tweeted at him, and this candidate had actually already committed in a tweet to support a Disability Act. He said, hey, great that you support the idea of a Disability Act. While you're at the ball game, will you press Justin Trudeau to do the same? And he was looking at his Twitter, and he wrote back and said, yes, I will. This is on Twitter, which, of course, we then retweet all over the place. So these are the kinds of grassrootsy, almost spontaneous things that can happen. It is another strategy you might think about during an election campaign is trying to get media coverage. And you'd think, well, it should be pretty easy to get media coverage during an election campaign. After all, you're focusing on an election issue. It relates to lots of people. And during an election campaign, there's usually more coverage of issues relating to the particular level of government, the province or the federal government, than in the usual case. Unfortunately, what I've just said, while it makes absolutely common sense, isn't the case. In fact, I find it harder to get media coverage on disability issues during an election campaign, even if it relates to the election, than if it doesn't, than off election periods. What I've found about the way elections are covered is this. Number one, they tend to cover, we have a parliamentary system, not a presidential system of government, but our corporate media cover elections in a kind of presidential campaign way. They have they have reporters covering each party leader, and they report on what they said or what they did or what they were confronted with that day. And if disability didn't come up, and of course it doesn't, typically, unfortunately, as often as it should, in their platforms, and they don't address it, then it doesn't get covered. And if you try to organize some kind of event, often they won't cover it because their reporters are busy on the 3 or 4 buses following the leaders around. Moreover, it gets worse. The journalists, at least the pundits, spend a lot of time covering the horse race. Who's in the lead? What are the polls saying? Essentially telling us what we think rather than letting us figure out what we think. And while I, as a consumer of news, find this enormously frustrating, I find it especially frustrating because there are more stories relevant to the election that could have been covered had they stopped with so much of this horse race stuff. I know journalists who themselves think it's shabby reporting, but yeah, it goes on. The other thing that happens during an election is this. There's a bit of a dance between the corporate media and the political parties and their campaigns over what are going to be the big issues. Each party wants to frame the issue differently. They want to frame the issue that favors their electability and undermines the electability of their opponent. And the media are trying to decide what they think the public thinks are the issues, whether using polling or whatever. And in the end, each of them tend to distill the election into 2 or 3 or 4 issues in their own minds, the journalists and the parties, respectively. And then that's what gets the coverage. And if you're not one of those 3 or 4, it is extremely hard to get the coverage. I know I've tried in almost every election, certainly every provincial election since 1995. There are ways to do it, but you've got to be ready for it to be tough. More when I talk about media strategy later, But in a nutshell, it's important to know that some media will do a show or an interview on what are the issues we're not hearing about. Knowing they're going to do that, it's worth focusing the media on you as one of that. The second is finding an issue that could grab their attention because it relates to the election itself. The all candidates debate in the inaccessible school is a great illustration. And the third strategy, which I want to turn to now, is the disability all candidates debate. Now, all candidates debates are usually done on a riding by riding basis. The candidates for that riding get together and face questions, and they're pretty ho-hum. Usually people go to them are largely already decided, supporting one of the candidates or other. But increasingly in the past 10 years, folks within the disability community have organized disability all candidates debates. They pick a location in a central place, and then they invite the parties to choose which candidate they want to send. Now they can be live streamed, and that's made a huge difference. So you do it hybrid, in person and online. You invite people to email in questions or give questions at the time. You invite a noted journalist or other person to moderate these debates. I moderated, I think, one or two. And you invite people to come to it, and you invite the media to cover it. And the beauty of it is, if it's live streamed, then it can be archived, it's available, and even if you don't get coverage that day, you could get coverage another day by pointing to the live stream. Another strategy, let me leave elections and come up with a couple of other strategies for you. Shadow public hearings. Public hearings, which I'm going to talk about in a later lecture, are the kind of things which a legislative body, municipality, or provincial government or federal government will hold when they're proceeding on a particular issue or piece of legislation or bylaw, and they invite members of the public to come in. Well, it's possible when there's an issue that's not getting enough attention to organize, in effect, shadow public hearings. You dress them up to look like a public hearing, but you do them in a way, you organize them yourself. So for example, I'm going to give you some examples that I've been involved in. 1995, a Conservative Premier of Ontario is elected, Mike Harris. He promises a Disabilities Act, but after he gets elected, does pretty much nothing to start implementing it. After 3 years of pressure, they announced that they're going to hold a public consultation, but their public consultation is totally closed and invitation only. We said, that's wrong. You need to not you handpick who to hear from. The public should be able to come forward. So what we did is we picked a night in August 4th, 1998, I remember it well, and a group of us organized public hearings. We got a committee room in the legislature. There were no legislative hearings. It was in recess. And we invited all the parties to send a candidate, a member of the parliament, of the legislature. And we had one from each. There were then 3 political parties. Each sent a member. I don't think the Conservatives wanted to, but they kind of couldn't not. And then we had people go in, and everybody made their own little delegation and basically said what they would have said to the minister had the minister had an open consultation. We had between 100 and 200 people came. It was a lot of fun. It was really positive. And in the middle of a slow news day, it got a lot of media coverage, both on what we were campaigning for, strong legislation, and the government's kind of deficient closed consultation. We did this also more recently in November of 2024. It was the 30th anniversary of the birth of the Disability Act movement. And we went to the Ontario legislature and held shadow public hearings there on how far have we come under the law that was passed in 2005. Spoiler alert, not far enough. Again, at the Ontario legislature, again, invited members of all 3 political parties, but this time we were able to live stream it. So people could speak whether they were in Toronto or they were at the other end of the province, and we have an archive that anybody can see. Another possibility of a political action is, let me just give you one more shadow public hearing. Excuse me, I forgot. In 2001, the Mike Harris Conservative government brought a bill in they called the Ontarians with Disabilities Act 2001. It was far too weak, but it was in the legislature. They did have hearings in a couple of cities, but they didn't have one in London, Ontario. So what we did, is we organized a shadow consultation in London and said, if you're not going to do one there, we're going to do one for you. And I hope I've got it right. It was either in 2001 or 2004. But it nevertheless was able to create what was a legislative hearing in a location which otherwise wasn't going to get one. It didn't have any legislative authority, but on the other hand, it certainly had visibility in that community. Another form of tool in our toolkit are municipal or provincial, speaking of the Canadian term, or federal legislative resolutions. What's a resolution? Well, it's basically members of the body, the municipality, the city council, or the legislature, basically voting, say, making some kind of declaration. Do these have legal force and effect? No, they can't compel anybody to do anything. But they can have a lot of political force and effect. Let me give you some examples. When we were campaigning for the Disabilities Act starting in 1994, I mentioned Mike Harris got elected a Conservative Premier in 1995. For a year, he and his minister did nothing and wouldn't meet with us to talk about the Disabilities Act that they had promised. We got a motion proposed in the Ontario legislature by an opposition member that simply reiterated the promise. Be it resolved that the Premier will commit to that the Ontario government legislature will pass a Disabilities Act and so on, and the government will work with us to develop it. That's what was in his election promise, and the beauty of that wording is it was not critical of the government for doing nothing. It simply reiterated the promise. Now you might think, well, why don't you get snarky and attack them for what they aren't doing? If we had done that, the government, which had a majority, would defeat the motion. But by wording it in terms of the government's actual promise, we knew the opposition parties would vote for it, but the government had to vote for it too. They couldn't vote against their own promise. And reluctantly, they did. They passed it. And it helped us pressure to get a meeting finally with the minister. 3 years later, after when the government was doing its rather anemic public consultation, we wanted to come forward. We were offered a private member's bill by an opposition member. I said no for the reasons I've given earlier in these discussions. But what I did do, and our team did, is we decided we would have an opposition member named Dwight Duncan, a Liberal from Windsor, then in the opposition, propose a motion of what the Disabilities Act should include. And we listed 11 principles, which were the principles we had rallied around as a result of our consensus building activities that I described in an earlier lecture, using the principles I described in an earlier lecture. Did I say consensus? I meant common ground building activities. And again, comes before the legislature, put out an action kit, get people together, lobbying for it. It passed. That motion had no legal force whatsoever, but it has, since it passed on October 29th, 1998, become the absolute yardstick by which any legislative action in this area has been measured. Other provincial community groups in other parts of the country, Manitoba, Barrier-Free Manitoba, Barrier-Free British Columbia, others have used our principles, drawn on them in framing what their objectives would be. Two political parties in Ontario included them in their election commitments to us subsequently. So a motion that, or a resolution that may formally have no legal force can have a lot of consequence. Another thing we did back then is we when we were trying to get the government to pass the Disabilities Act is a number of our supporters in local communities would go to their city council calling on the province to pass the Disabilities Act. Local politicians were prepared to do this, and they did it in well over a dozen cities. And after one passes it, then we'd go. Our supporters could go to a city council in another community and say, "Hey, they did it over there. Why don't you?" And so on. It's a way of building momentum. Similarly, Barrier-Free Manitoba, Barrier-Free British Columbia did this in their campaign for successful campaign for disability legislation. What do we do when the government actually does conduct a consultation? And I don't mean a bogus one, but like a serious one. They will come along and they will offer these at some time. Whatever we think of the government's motives, whether we think they're genuine or not genuine, we will always encourage people to take part in them. Use them to our advantage. Whatever the government may be doing, and whether it's good or not, whether they've already made up their mind or not, use their consultations. We use their consultations as a lever or a platform for organizing and building support. Again, this is perfect for an action kit. Summarize what our goals are, educate your members on the process, what you need to do to take part, give them action tips of what to say, but ask them to say what they want, not build on your suggestions. Invite input as you go along on what suggestions people have, because you can always build or expand the action kit. If there's an opportunity to submit a brief, which I've talked about in an earlier lecture, getting something out, whether it's just a page or two or something longer, is great. Let people just come forward and say, we agree with it, or quote from it, or frankly, use it, but don't attribute it. Again, as I said earlier, I like being plagiarized. If our language says it that well, and people want to say it and use it as their own, I'm ecstatic. Moreover, if there is a consultation being undertaken, one thing that you can focus on from a disability rights perspective is ensuring that the consultation is itself accessible and that it's available to everybody. That means that they have sign language interpreters and captioning where needed, that there's potentially attendant care for people with disabilities who need that the venue selected is accessible, and so on. And it's always helpful to offer to government or whoever's holding the consultation that you're happy to give them tips on how to do it. And you're happy to publicize it so that you can help. And if there is something that is deficient, don't be shy about jumping on it. The Ontario government announced what was, I think, obviously restricted consultation on a Wednesday before Labor Day in 2019 that closed on a Friday before Labor Day, 2 days later, on an issue that really mattered to us. We issued a news release blasting them for it, and before I even got on the phone with anybody, they backed down and extended it, at least superficially, for a couple of weeks. When the government made amendments that we objected to in 2006 to how human rights discrimination claims are enforced in Ontario, they appointed an independent review to review it a few years later, as the Act required. That independent review was supposed to hold hearings in a number of cities. They booked one for Thunder Bay, but then they announced they were canceling it because not enough people subscribed. Well, we found out they hadn't announced it in Thunder Bay. They hadn't given people a chance to subscribe. And when nothing would change on that score, we fed it to the Thunder Bay media. Out comes an article blasting the independent review for not going to Thunder Bay. And guess what? They changed their opinion. They went to Thunder Bay, and man, that independent review got an earful of important feedback on messages that we were advocating for. Another strategy that we've used that's in the toolkit and that you can consider is the open letter. The open letter is where you would, as we've used it, is we set out in it a demand, a request. We want a particular piece of legislation passed or a certain regulation passed or a policy change. And we, in it, like that letter I talked about earlier, the demand of government to government, spell out what you want, why you want it, plain language, and make it compelling, not only to persuade the government, but anybody who might want to sign it. I aim for tactical reasons to get these signed by organizations. I'm happy if individuals write the government and say we support it too. There's no question of that. But for what it's worth, using this strategy, it can be very compelling if you go to government and say 20 major disability organizations are all signed on to this agenda. How do you do this? When writing the letter, you use the common ground building strategies that I talked about in an earlier lecture. And I write it making sure I'm not compromising on what we're asking for, but I make sure my wording will be something that a spectrum of disability organizations will be supportive of, from those who are the most vigorous advocates to those who are the most cautious in their rhetoric and asks and so on. Then, and I may, if there's some organizations that are, I can't write these by committee. You can't get 20 organizations together and say, let's send it back and forth. And that will take forever. So my job in writing it, your job in writing it, is to know enough about their different perspectives using the strategies I've been offering, so that when you set pen to paper or keyboard to computer, you are in a position of knowing kind of where they're at and are most likely to get them engaged. Then if there's anyone or a couple that you think might be particularly nervous or uncomfortable that you think are important, you might flip it to them before you send it out for comment, saying, hey, this is what we're about to send out, but is there anything in there that you think we should change? Then I send it out to, I don't announce publicly, I just send it out to, I first approach a few organizations that I know are most likely to sign. The quickest and the easiest, because there's some who are just very supportive on this stuff. They can get a turnaround decision quickly and get back. And then once you've got them, and maybe 4 or 5 or 6, then you start approaching other organizations, because then you can add to it, hey, we're doing this open letter. We're just reaching out to people now. These 5 or 6 or 4 or 5 organizations this time, would you be prepared to too? And then as you get more names, if they're still deliberating, say, hey, by the way, since we sent it out, we've also got these added 5 organizations. And then you build up your open letter, and then you send it to government and release it. It can also be a news story, and we've done that before, made a media release about it. More about all of that when I talk in the last couple of lectures about media strategy. Another way of putting it, as you compile these supporters, you want the strongest supporters, but you also want people to sign because they just want to feel like they're being team players, or they don't want to be seen as not signing. Obviously, if they don't support it, I've got to make sure I get signatures from people who are authorized. The last thing in the world. And if I have any doubt, I'm going to triple check. I won't let one person say to me, hey, I know this organization told me that you can sign it for them. I need to hear from someone in writing authoritatively so that I know we're okay. So while I'm deploying these various tools from the toolkit, there's a little secret I have to share. I don't start the year with a master plan for the year. I have a sense of ideas of where we want to go. And of course, the first few months and the first sort of chunk of time with the priorities, that's usually quite in place. But after that, events can supersede everything that you planned. At the end of every year, I write an AODA email update that's a year-end report. I want to tell our supporters where we've come, what we've done, what we didn't achieve, and maybe a couple of hints about what might come up in the next year. I can tell you every time I sit down to write the year-end report, I reflect back on how little of what I'm reporting I foresaw at the start of the year. And as I finish that year-end report, I I ponder that next year at this time I'll be writing another one, and frankly, right now I don't have a clue what it's going to say. That's not bad. That's part of the idea of being creative, flexible, and always able to shift as circumstances shift. Now, as I'm talking about all of these ideas, one last topic. You reasonably might wonder. So you want to find all these options and educate people on them. Some of this requires some serious research, whether it's legal research or it's policy research or learning about other domains like education or whatever. Who's going to do all this? You as the social justice advocate may do that, but I want to suggest a couple of things. One is additional thing. One is I like to build a circle of informal advisors. They typically don't have a fancy title, but they're people who may be specialists in education and disability, or specialists in information technology and digital accessibility, whatever it is. Kind of my go-to, or built environment accessibility, kind of my go-to-it person or people. Maybe one, maybe more than one. And I use them to kind of educate me, and if at times we need to present them to the community or to the media or whatever, we can rely on them, but they're kind of a background resource. I talked earlier about the options paper or discussion paper we developed back in 2004 for what to include in the Disabilities Act. This was a circle of professors at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. The professor who agreed to lead this, who has been friends with now since then for quite a long time, a gentleman named Lawrence Sawson. He was a young administrative law professor with just a general interest in public regulation. He's gone on to become the dean of the Osgoode Hall Law School, and that's where I had my first stint. He invented my position as a visiting professor of disability rights for 7.5 years. He's now a justice on the Ontario Court of Appeal. It's fantastic to have had his help and that of his colleagues. And it's also great to be able to get an opportunity to involve in your activities the work of other people who volunteer to help you out, and who later go on to other important roles where their experience with us can help inform their thinking about the world, whatever it is that they may be doing. And finally, another key part of, if you need to answer the question, who's going to research this? There is a population of people out there who could be available to help you, who have expertise, and who may be willing to help for free if they know it's a social justice endeavor. And that is people within the academic community. That could be university professors who are doing research in the field, or it could be graduate students who are in a faculty to which your subject area matters, and who want to do graduate studies or research papers. And the topic that you're covering could well be a great subject for their research. You get the advantage of their help. They get the advantage of being able to do work when they're in an area that interests them, when they're plugged into community folks who can help give them input, and to have a feeling that their graduate studies research actually could help some people advance the goal of social justice. There's a lot of people out there in the academic community, both as students and as professors. So hunting around to find folks who would be interested in helping you out, whether formally you give them a fancy title, call them the director of research for your committee or whatever it is, or just informally telling them, you're helping us out. Either way, it can really help. So that's the toolkit, the traditional toolkit I use, but it's not the end of the spectrum of resources that we can draw on. Our next lecture will look to kind of more unorthodox avenues for advancing goals of social justice advocacy. So stay tuned.